Hey kids, comics. Silver-haired Bronze Age babe here, yakking about her comic book collection, and today doing a compare and contrast video on how the boys at DC Comics decided to do characters in Bondage. I personally see a difference between how they treated women characters versus how they treated at least one particular man. Lois Lane. For those of you who have watched my videos, you know I have a collection, a CGC graded collection of Lois Lane in Bondage covers, because I just think they're so funny and really of their time in the 70s, because that's what the 70s was like. But you can also see what the 70s was like in looking at the first run of Mr. Miracle. A title which I've recently gotten into and am enjoying to no end. But it dawned on me as I was perusing through there that Mr. Miracle found himself in a lot of bondage situations as well. And so it's fun to compare and contrast how they treated him versus Lois. So here's Lois tied to the ground, and you can see how they decide to highlight parts of her body there, versus Mr. Miracle, who is tied to the ground and in a very different kind of way. So there's that. Then here is Lois Lane tied to kind of a tree versus Mr. Miracle tied to kind of the same kind of idea, but again, look to where how they've decided to demonstrate, via what parts of their bodies they show on there. What I think is lovely about this is it's basically the same color design too, and roughly happening, by the way, about the same time. This was in December, this was in February, so they are of their time for sure. Then here's Lois affixed to a moving object, a truck flying through the air, and how they tied her there, versus Mr. Miracle tied to something that's flying through the air. This, in his case, it's a chair. But again, the angle with which they decide to show his body is very different than the angle with which they decide to show Lois's. You could imagine some different things could happen with his legs, I suppose, but it didn't. So that's that. And then here's Lois tied to kind of a standing object. Also, Thorn is there too, and so is their friend Julie. Again, versus Mr. Miracle tied to a, stationary object. Very different decisions on what angle to show his body at and what parts of his body need to be tied up and in what position. So there's that. And then I think this may be my favorite. This literally happened. This was at the same time frame. I think these books were published a month apart. So there's Lois with the tied to the pink and white target. And here's Mr. Miracle tied to the exact same target. I'll just let you take a look at that and ponder those images, and to see what kind of differences you can tell about how they're tied up to those things and where those rockets and darts are going to be aimed. And finally, just an extra credit. Here's how they decide to tie Wonder Woman to a torpedo versus how they decide to tie Mr. Miracle to a torpedo. I see a difference. Thanks so much for stopping by. I'll see you next time.